All right, so we are in session 3. So if you want to pull that piece of paper out, session 3 is what we're going to be looking at, and really the first 2 sessions have been all about should look like this. Session 3. The first 2 sessions have really been about laying the foundation. All right? Foundation. Jesus is the model. We got to make disciples, not just be content to make decisions. And then we want to be sure that we follow the pathway, the process, not just programs, but a process that we're moving people through. And I went over this really super quick. When I teach at seminary, it takes me several weeks to just get through the detail of that. I'm just kind of giving you a flyby, but the greater detail is in the book. So if you say, man, I didn't catch a lot of that, just look at the book, and it's got all the detail. I'm just kind of surfacing the concepts for you. All right, now what we're doing is we're going to pivot, and we're going to talk about what are the practical things you need to do. What do you need to do? There's some very specific steps that you need to do to begin to transition a church to become an intentional disciple-making church. I remember sitting at a lunch with a pastor one time, and he said, well, if I do all this stuff you're talking about, is it going to make any difference in my church? As he was digging into his meal. And I said, yes, it will. If you will commit to doing the work of disciple-making, it will transform your church, because disciple-making becomes a part of the DNA of your church. It's going to make all the difference in the world. Your people are going to be different. Your ministries are going to look different. Everything is going to look different, all right? So disciple-making becomes a part of who we are. But our motive for making disciples should be out of a motive of love, right? Everything that we do ought to be out of a motive of love. And you look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, Paul is writing. He said, for you know, brothers, loved by God, that he has chosen you, because our gospel came to you not only in word, but also in the power and in the Holy Spirit and with full conviction. You know what kind of men we proved to be among you for your sake. And you became imitators of us and of the Lord. For you received the word in much affliction with the joy of the Holy Spirit, so that you became an example to all believers in Macedonia and Achaia. For not only has the word of the Lord sounded forth from you in Macedonia and Achaia, but your faith in God has gone forth everywhere. In other words, he's saying, you know what? You remember how I came to you? Remember what kind of men we were among you? And God's done such a work in you that now your influence is ringing out through these regions. It's just ringing out like I were to hit a big gong. And it's just resounding. That's the idea. Your ministry, though it may be small, we're not really sure how big the Thessalonian church was, but it had a resounding ministry. Why? Because it was a disciple-making ministry. And it was motivated by love. When you go on to look at how Paul talks about them, he talks about his love. He said, we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her children. That's in chapter 2, verse 7. Chapter 2, verse 11, he said, for you know, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you. In verse 17, he says, but since we were torn away from you, brothers, for a short time in person, but not in heart, we endeavored to the more eagerly and with great desire to see you face to face, because we wanted to come to you. I, Paul, again and again, but Satan hindered us. In verse 19, chapter 2, verse 19, he says, then he writes these words, for what is our hope and our crown in boasting before our Lord Jesus at his coming? Is it not you? You are our joy. You are our crown. You know, whenever I read those verses in 1 Thessalonians 2, it just reminds me how much Paul loved these people. He loved them. He said, man, I was away with you. I was torn away from you, but I was thinking about you all the time. And I couldn't wait to get with you. And you know, I'm like a father to you. Sometimes I correct you and I challenge you, but I'm like a mother sometimes to you. I put my arm around you and I weep for you. There's this love, this palpable love. And I guess the question is, do you love the people that you shepherd? Do you love them like that? Do you love them enough to give your own lives? He said, we came to you not just with the gospel, but our very lives. See, Paul was not just convinced that, well, as long as I preach at them and I run a couple of programs, then then we're good. He was constantly investing. I believe that the greatest motivator for disciple making is true love. That's what Jesus did. He loved his own. Remember in John when it says in the upper room, he came to them. He loved them to the very end. What a great statement. And so really, this whole idea of this next move, which is moving from religious activity to relational investment, is all about love. Once you know that Jesus is a model, once you know what a disciple is, once you know what the process is for doing it, then the next thing you got to do is you got to roll up your sleeves and you got to go to work doing it. And you've got to invest relationally in people in your church. You can't just order something from the bookstore and say, hey, y'all go through this. You have to personally invest in your people. And you do it because you love them. Now, when I talk to leaders and I get an opportunity to speak to pastors quite a bit recently, I'll talk to guys, I'll say, so who are you discipling in your church? And usually it'll go something like this. They'll kind of look at the ground and go, well, we got groups going on. I'm like, yeah, I know, but who are you discipling? See, I can tell you that I've got Chad, and I've got Bobby, and I've got Brent in my church. That I just spent time with them last Wednesday, and we went together to learn how to share our faith. And we went out. And I've invested in those guys. I could give you a list of who I did before that, and who I did before that, and who I did before that. I've told our staff, I'm always going to have somebody, and so are you. That's in a loving way, right? Say, you are too. Because that's our work. That's what we do. And so why is it that many times we don't tend to do that, right? 2 Timothy 2:2 is very clear. And what you heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable or faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Paul had Timothy's and faithful men who taught other people also. That's 4 generations. Paul to Timothy, faithful men to others also. He had 4 generations. Listen, you should have generations of disciples in your church. And even if it's a small church, you should be able to invest in a few, then invest in others, invest in others. That's how the gospel resonates. That's how you have a resonating impact in your church. But a lot of pastors have excuses why they can't do that. So let me just take a few minutes to debunk a few of these. One is, I don't have time. I got to preach on Sunday morning. I got to preach on Sunday night. I got to preach on Wednesday night. I got to visit the hospital. I got to deal with deacons in my church. Sorry, that was a slip. I got to deal with, all this stuff. And then this person got marriage problems, and this person needs me to do that. And I got to go out to visitation, and I'm too tired. There's no way that I can spend time with just a handful of people. Usually what I'll say to a guy like that is to say, don't you ever get tired of doing it all on your own? Yeah, man. Don't you wish you had somebody that would help you with that? Yeah, I sure do. Then why don't you make a disciple? They can take care of half that for you. You can divide that work up. So you're not doing it all by yourself. Listen, you have the time to do what you want to do. Isn't that true? Most of the time, pastors, nobody sets your schedule. You set your own schedule. And so you have the time to do what you want to do. And listen, the things that are important, you'll find a time to get done. I am super busy, but I make time. I carve out certain times a day that I'm going to meet with men. And I'm going to disciple men, and that's when I do it. And I have to change that. Sometimes I have to do it early in the morning. Sometimes I do it in the evening. Sometimes I have to do it in the afternoon. But I will adjust to find accommodate the schedule of the guys that I'm discipling. But I will be doing it because that's what Christ calls to do. You have time to do what you want to do. Number 2, I've never been discipled before. This is a common example because most pastors have never been discipled before. It's very sad to say, but it's true. And they'll say, well, Craig, I just never been discipled before. I wouldn't know what to do with another person. Well, I usually will say, do you have kids? Yeah, I got some kids. Were you a dad before you had kids? Is that a trick question? No, it's not a trick question. Were you a dad before you had kids? No. Well, how did you know how to be a dad? Well, you just have some babies. Right? You father some children, and then all of a sudden you're a dad. Right? And then you kind of learn as you go what to do. And you learn from other guys that are doing it, and you read some books on it, and you just learn as you go. And that's the same way in disciple. Maybe nobody sat down and taught you how to disciple somebody, but let me tell you something. There are resources now more than ever before to help you. And by the way, you're the pastor, you're a leader. You know more than they do. All you have to do is fake it, some of the time, just stay one step ahead of them, and just do the best you can to stay ahead of them, and they'll pick up what they need to pick up, all right? But don't let that excuse of, well, I've never been, a lot of pastors, they'll do that. They'll use that as an excuse to not make disciples. Here's a third one. I invest in people through my preaching and counseling. I make disciples. Every Sunday morning, I'm making disciples. I get up there and I preach the Word of God to them. And I counsel them, and that's how I make disciples. That's the way I do it. I do it by preaching and by counseling. Let me ask you something. You think you're a better preacher than Jesus? I don't know. Never heard him. All right? Probably not. All right? Probably not. I'm pretty sure I'm not a better preacher than Jesus. But Jesus did not only preach. He did preach, but he did not only preach. Did you know he spent 4 times as much time with a few than he did with the crowd preaching? 4 times as much time with a few that he did preaching. Why? Because he knew that while preaching is important, preaching does not have some of the elements necessary for transformation, life transformation. All being accountability, face-to-face modeling, things like that you only get in a disciple-making environment. For example, if you're contrasting preaching and disciple making, there are some things to pick up. Preaching is mostly informational. Disciple making is transformational. Preaching is about content. Disciple making challenges and deals with their character. Preaching is about what happens in the building. Disciple making is what happens outside the building. Preaching tells a man what to do. Disciple making shows a man what to do by modeling. Preaching is in the pew training. Disciple making is on the job training. Preaching, you're accountable to deliver the word, but in disciple making, that person is accountable to obey the word that they've received. Preaching educates the leader. Disciple making equips the leader. Preaching can't be reproduced, but disciple making is all about reproduction. You saying, Craig, you don't believe in preaching? No, I do it every week. But it's just a part of the process. It's not all the process. Preaching happens probably right around in here. People come to Christ, they're hearing the preaching of the word, they're getting solid. But at some point, somebody had to come alongside you and show you what to do and help you and even confront you with some character issues or some things going on in your marriage, things that are happening in your private life that would always be overlooked in a large group environment, but are not overlooked when you're face to face. So, while we need to be preaching the word faithfully, we need to also be discipling men. Here's another excuse. I'm not personally, it's not really my personality or my passion to make disciples. I have one pastor, he said, do I really have to do this? I mean, can't I just preach and pray and that's it? I mean, he really asked me that. I'm like, not if you want to be obedient to Jesus. Listen, you're not going to have to stand before me and give an account to me. You're going to have to stand and give an account to him. And that motivates me because I really believe he told us to make disciples, and I believe that it's a command of God, and I should do it. And no, although your personality may not be outgoing or very good one-on-one, or may not be your passion, it is your calling. And I just believe if you're obedient in the things that God has put in front of you, that God will bless it. Honestly, I believe most of these guys that have all the excuses why they can't disciple, if they would just do it once, they would see the joy in their heart and that you wouldn't be able to pull them away from investing in the lives of men. Here's another one. I can't show favoritism by focusing on a few people. I have some pastors say, well, I can never do that because if I hang out with just a few guys, then everybody else gets upset and they get jealous, and I got to spread myself out. I got to spread myself out. I can't really just focus on one or two. But listen, even if that legitimately is a problem, most churches understand church leaders, right? Most churches have some leadership in place. Some group of elders, some group of deacons, some group of Sunday school teachers, some group of somebody. They're leaders. And they understand that the pastor needs to spend time with the leaders. I've never seen a church blow up and split over the pastor spending time with the leaders that he's supposed to lead. And so I would just say start there. If you have a staff member, great. If you don't, you have high-value volunteers, you have key leaders in your church that are heading up certain areas of ministry, then start there. Start with the leaders that are already there and then train them to multiply to the leaders that are underneath them. And what you'll find is you'll begin that movement of multiplication. You know, another excuse is, I just can't really show who I really am. If I get in a group, maybe they'll realize that I don't pray as often as I should. Maybe if I get in a group and I start talking about, I don't share my faith. Or I'm not in the Word on a regular basis. That's really true. That one of the things about disciple making as a leader, pastor, is that when you start to do it, it holds you accountable. I can't be telling my guys about sharing your faith without having any stories about how I did that. Because all of a sudden it becomes very obvious that I'm not doing it. I can't talk to them about my prayer life if I'm not actually living my prayer life. And so it does reveal something of who we are. But after all, isn't that what Jesus did? He was just replicating who he was in the lives of these men. Isn't that what Paul did? Watch my example, follow my example, see my suffering, follow me in it. What people need is not just an eloquent speaker. They need someone that they can see actually living this out. And that needs to be you. With all your flaws and all your mistakes, like all of us have. And even to say, guys, I'm not doing this very good. Pray for me. What a great modeling of authenticity and genuineness. To say, I'm struggling in this area. Pray for me. They'll respect you more when they really see what's in your heart, when you're sharing your heart with them. The last thing, last excuse is I need something that'll produce fast results. Like I said before, this is not a quick fix. This is a slow answer, but it is the answer that Jesus gave us. And as we do it, there is a growing effect to disciple making. The church doesn't need men of excuses. The church needs men of action. Men of action that will actually do what Jesus called us to do. And to set the example and do it the very best we can. We can't just assembly line people by running them through Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, Wednesday nights, and expect transformation. We got to get in and meet with them face to face and find out what's really going on in their life and help them to take another step. And then show them to do that with somebody else. And then they will do it with somebody else. That's how it actually works. And I tell you what, I have guys at our church now, they come and tell me stories of men that have really been changed and transformed. And I don't know anything about those stories. They're telling me these stories, but these are guys 3 and 4 generations deep, 5 generations deep that have been discipled. And they're bearing fruit. And I just celebrate with what God's doing. But that's what we need. We need somebody to start the movement. And that person to start the movement should be the pastor and should be leading by example. So here's some do's and don'ts. Some really practical things. If you're a pastor leader, listen up. These are some do's and don'ts. Number 1, don't just start casting vision about disciple making immediately. Do start making disciples immediately. Now that may seem a little odd. You mean you don't want me to go home and preach on disciple making this Sunday? No, I don't want you to do that. What I want you to do is I want you to go back and identify somebody to disciple. Because if you go, let's say you go to church on Sunday and you say, I'm going to give an eloquent message about disciple making, and you're going to have some people look at you, and some people are going to say, oh, that'll never work. That doesn't work, Pastor. I don't want to do that, right? And then what are you going to do? Say, well, I think it will. Oh, I don't. So then you're stuck. Or they may say, we all want to be discipled. Well, there's no way you can disciple everybody. But what if you went back and you discipled, you find one man, or ladies, you find one woman, and you start to disciple them, and you invest in their lives, and then you help them disciple another, and you pick up another, and all of a sudden you've got a group of people that disciple. Then when you stand up and you go public on preaching about it, and they say, oh, Pastor, that'll never work. You say, yeah, it will. Hey, John, stand up and tell them what happened to you. And Bill, stand up and tell them what happened to you. And Jeff, tell them what happened to you. And Susan, tell them what happened to you. All of a sudden you got people in your church that go, yeah, preacher's not crazy. This is actually good. And if they all say, yeah, we want to be discipled, then obviously you can't do it, but you got 4 or 5 people that will help you. So the better thing to do is to reserve the preaching at first. Restrain from the urge to just preach about it and just do it. Just do it. Just go find one person that you can begin to disciple and invest in them. Number 2, don't turn disciple making into over to another staff person or lay leader. Do lead the charge yourself. In other words, you need to be upfront, leading the charge, setting the example. Don't say, well, you know what, we let this person handle it, and I handle the preaching and other things. No. You need to be the one setting the example yourself. Number 3, don't do a mass sign-up. Do select people yourself. I had a pastor just recently. He said, well, I just got in front of my church and said, everybody that wants me to disciple them, stand up or come forward. And he had about 30 people come forward. And I said, what'd you do with all of them? He goes, well, I worked with them. About only 9 of them made it through the first round. And now he's recovered and gone on and multiplied. But I'm like, I don't know that I would do that. All right. I wouldn't do a mass call. You don't see Jesus standing up saying, I'm looking for some disciples. Anybody? He doesn't do that. What does he do? He goes up. 1, 2, follow me. Hey, you follow me. Hey, come over here, follow me. It's almost every time it's a personal invitation face to face. Think about it. So be selective. Choose key leaders first, faithful men, faithful women first, so that the odds that they will be able to multiply are greater than somebody that doesn't even come to church but once every 6 months, They can't even get them to church, much less get them to disciple. Start with some faithful people that will take what you've taught them and invest in them and reproduce it. Start there. That would be my advice. And last thing, don't underestimate the power of few people who walk with God. Do prioritize reaching and training others. Don't underestimate the impact. You say, well, man, I'll just start with a handful of people. I can't do anything. Oh, yeah? Great tree starts from just a little seed, right? Big things come from small things. Don't underestimate the power of a handful of people that you invest in. And you know what? They may not bring about this movement even at your own church. God may move them to somewhere else. But God will use them in other places to begin to create a movement. It may be till you get to heaven that you realize that your investment bore great fruit. So don't underestimate the power of a few. Here are a couple of simple steps that you can take to invest in a few. All right, this is just getting super practical now. Here we go. Number 1, walk with Jesus in a deep and personal way. You personally need to walk with Christ. Be in the Word. Be in prayer. Ask God to show you people that are far from Him that you can invest in and spend time with, share the gospel with. You just walk with God so that you cannot reproduce what you're not. You only reproduce what you are. Right? You reproduce in kind. So if you're walking with God, as best you know how, you're going to reproduce people that walk with God in your best. But if you're not, then it's going to be awful hard to produce people that are. See what I'm saying? So walk with God on your own. Number 2, real practical, select the right person. Like I said, start with leaders. We call them poppers, not poopers, poppers at our church. Poppers are just, it's kind of like popcorn, when they start popping, pop, 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 pop. These are people that all of a sudden their spiritual interest is popping. They're asking questions. They're showing up. They're bringing their Bible. They're showing interest. That means that the Holy Spirit's working. So look for those kind of people to invest in. Number 3, pick a tool. Pick a tool. Every carpenter's got a hammer. Every surgeon's got a scalpel. Every mechanic's got a wrench. Every disciple maker has got a tool that they use to disciple. You say, well, I got the Bible. That's all the tool I need. Well, that's true. We do have the Bible, and every tool you have should come from the Scriptures. But when you have a disciple-making tool that specifically helps train them in these competencies and character qualities, it will help ensure multiplication 3 and 4 generations deep. You may be great, but can that person you're training do the same thing with someone else? And can that person do the same thing with somebody else? It's very difficult without a tool. But when you have a disciple-making tool, a resource that they can use, then you help to ensure the quality of your disciples 3, 4, and 5 generations down the line. We have some disciple-making tools available for you to look at today that we wrote for our church, and now other churches are using them as well. But they're 3 books. One is called Walk with God. One book is called Reach Your World, and one is called Invest in a Few. Does that sound vaguely familiar to anything that we talked about earlier? These competencies, it's designed to do exactly what Jesus trained them to do. So that's what we're using, and we're getting 5 and 6 generations deep now in our church. And God's using that. So pick a tool. Number 4, guard your time. Make sure that you choose a time that is important for you. Carve out time to make disciples. I disciple my guys right now on Wednesday night, but I've done it on Saturday mornings. I've done it on Tuesday mornings. I've done it lots of different times. You just carve out the time. Number 5, disciple in stages. What that means is I don't ever usually say to a guy, hey, now I need you for the next year to commit to this process. And we're going to go through all, these 3 or 4 books, and I'm going to ask you. I usually don't do that. And the reason why is because Jesus really didn't do that. Jesus, he started off here and he said, well, come and see. And then he gave them another phase. Okay, now follow me. Now another phase. Now be with me. I'm going to trade you. Now another phase, go multiply. So Jesus didn't say right here, all right, now you're going to have to multiply and it may cost you your life. He didn't start on there. He just in stages, right? So I found it really important to use a tool that's maybe 5 or 6 or 7 weeks long. And if that person can't ever show up, they don't ever do the work, they're not, then maybe they're not ready for that. Maybe they need to take a step back. But if you get a guy that's after 5 weeks, he's like, man, I've got it all. I've memorized all my verses. You can't stop now. We can't stop now. What else you got? Well, you got somebody that you know is going to multiply. Then you say, well, I do have this one other thing. Oh, okay. Well, let's do that. Well, I do have this one other thing. Oh, and then you look back and there was an intentional plan all along. Discipling in stages, I think, will help you to be sure that as you go through and you're discipling people, that you really are spending the most of your time with the most productive people. Does that make sense? Okay. I feel like I may be going too fast, but that's really important. Take them with you. Take them with you when you do ministry. David Gwynn, that big wrestler guy that influenced me when I was just in seminary, he always had a college student with him. Always had. Never went anywhere that he didn't have somebody he was discipling with him. So take your disciples that you're investing with. Take them with you to run errands. Take them with you if you got to go to the football game. Take them with you to that. Take them with you when you go on a ministry call. Take them with you when you go do things. Go visit somebody or go share something. Just bring them along with you and let them see what ministry looks like. And then along the way, you can have great opportunities to talk about Jesus and how they're walking with God. Here's another one. Expose them to evangelism opportunities. You need to expose them to different ways to share their faith and go with them to do it. This last Wednesday night, was it night before last? I took my 3 guys that I'm discipling down to a homeless shelter that's in our area. This homeless shelter serves breakfast and lunch every day, but on Wednesday nights they serve a dinner. Well, we happen to meet on Wednesday nights. So I just texted them. I said, okay, guys, we're going on a field trip tonight. I'm not telling you where we're going. Just be on time. So sure enough, they show up on time. Where are we going? Everybody get in the car. So we all get in the car. And so we started heading out. Now I'm training them on how to have spiritual conversations. That's what we've been talking about. So as we're headed down to the shelter, we're just talking about their lesson and what they learned and memorizing their verse and all that kind of thing. And then we pull up to the homeless shelter. And I said, now guys, remember, we're talking about how to have spiritual conversations, right? They said, right. I said, this is a homeless shelter that we partner with, and they're serving dinner tonight, and we're going to serve them dinner. But as we're serving them dinner, I want you to have some spiritual conversations. And I want, when we get in the car, we're going to see how far we got in the conversations, okay? And then we prayed, and I said, does this feel uncomfortable for you? And they all looked at me like, oh yeah, this feels uncomfortable. I said, good. If Jesus took his disciples up to Samaria, I can surely take you to this homeless shelter, you know? And good. Getting uncomfortable is a part of how you grow, right? And so we walk in, and they didn't really know, but we get in there, and they see me talking with people sitting down, so they find somebody to talk to, you know, and we serve dinner, and all of a sudden on the road back, I said, what did you learn? And they said, man, these people are just like us. They just need help. They were so thankful that we sat down and talked with them. I got to pray with one of them. I got to share my story with one of them. And you could see the light bulbs coming on. See, that's what you do. You expose them to opportunities to watch you or to be a part of sharing their faith. And so all of these things are how you move from spiritual activity, which is what we mostly do as pastors, to spiritual investment. Listen, the greatest thing you can do right now, if you don't remember anything, everything else I say is a blur today, the best thing you can do is go home and ask God to show you one person. Let me tell you one quick story. We're going to take a short break. One man, older man, was telling me that very thing. He said, Craig, you need to find one man to disciple. So I started praying about that. Lord, give me one guy. Give me one man to disciple. And after church on a Sunday night, there was not a whole lot of people there. It was on Sunday night. I finished the service, and I was in the hallway, and this young man walks in the door that I've never seen him before. He started coming toward me. He looked like he was a college student. He had just graduated from college. I stuck out my hand and said, hey, I'm Craig. What's your name? He said, hey, my name's Gibson. I said, nice to meet you, Gibson. Good to see you. What are you doing? And he goes, I just came, in, and we started talking. I said, well, hey, I've kind of felt a prompting right then of the Holy Spirit to talk to him about discipling. I said, hey, I'm going to meet with a couple of guys next week, and we're going to read the Bible and pray, and would you like to be a part of it? He goes, I'd love to be a part of that. So Gibson joined with me and two other guys, and we started meeting together, praying. I didn't really have a tool at that time. I didn't have all this stuff, like I've got figured out now. I was still really young in all of it. Over the course of time, those guys began to grow. Gibson was a believer. He started growing in his faith. Ended up falling in love with a girl in our church, and I did their wedding. Came on staff at our church for a period of time in evangelism. He went on to Southern Seminary in Kentucky, and then God led him to Philadelphia, where he's now planted a church in Philadelphia and doing a great job growing this church in Philadelphia. And so he and I continue to be great friends and partner together a lot. And one day I was telling this story about me meeting him in the hallway, and he goes, hey, did I ever tell you the rest of that story? I said, no, I don't. What do you mean? I don't know the rest. He said, well, let me tell you what happened. He said, I was praying for God to bring somebody to disciple me. And I would pray and pray, Lord, I need somebody to disciple me. I don't know how to grow. I don't know what to do. Lord, would you just bring me somebody to disciple? And he said, as I was driving down the road that night, I drove by that church. I've never been in that church before. Don't know him by that church. But he said, I felt the Spirit of God say, turn in right there. So we turned in. And he said, I just walked in the door. I didn't know what I was going to walk into. And he said, I turned in there. And there you were walking toward me. And you shook my hand. And you invited me to this group. And then it hit me. If you will pray, God, give me somebody, just one person to disciple. God's already working with somebody that's praying, God, give me somebody that will disciple me. And he will bring the two together. He'll do that in your life. Somebody right now is saying, Lord, bring me a woman to disciple me. Bring me a man that will disciple me. And that's you. It's you. But you've got to pray, Lord, show me who I need to disciple. I've got to move from religious activity, just being very religious and busy, to strategically investing my life in people. All right, take a break around your table, and I want you to ask those questions. This is going to get a little personal. It's going to get up in your chili, as we say in Texas. All right? Be honest. Don't lie. You're in a church. folks. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to quickly do this last little segment, and then we're going to do a little stand-up exercise here. Y'all are doing great, by the way. I haven't seen anybody, well, okay, only 2 people fall asleep. But really, other than that, that's pretty good. So y'all are doing great. Are you with me? Are you with me? Yeah. All right, you with me? All right, come on. All right, so little bit of review. We said you got to number one, say Jesus is the model. Once you convince it, now I got to define a disciple. Then I got to know the pathway, the 4 steps, disciple-making pathway. We're going to come back to that in a little bit, okay? So those are kind of my foundational understandings, my philosophical beliefs about ministry. Then what I need to do, first thing is roll up my sleeves, pick a tool, pick a person, and I, as the leader, start to disciple somebody, right? That's just what we talked about. Now, the next step is to build a team of disciple makers in my church. Now, if I go disciple somebody, then they're going to disciple somebody, and they're going to disciple somebody, right? If I have to do it all, then that's a problem, right? Is that true? If I have to do it all, it's a problem. And so what I want to do is I want to disciple somebody, and then I want to find somebody else to disciple. So, for example, let me just give you an illustration. I come here to Darren. I say, Darren, you're my man. And stand up. And so Darren and I are discipling somebody, each other. I'm discipling him, and we're spending time together. Darren's getting it. Amen. You didn't think it could happen, but Darren is getting it. And so finally I say, Darren, now it's time for you to get somebody. So you go ahead and find some. All right, come on up here. And then I'm going to go ahead and get Reed here. So come on up here, Reed. So now we have, now I'm discipling Reed and Darren's discipling Aaron, right? And so they're beginning to get it, right? And then after a period of time, I'm like, hey, buddy, you need to go get somebody, all right? So go get somebody. Go get somebody and pull them up. Find somebody, all right? And I'm going to go get somebody else too. Come on, Jason. Come on up here. So Jason looks like he needs to be discipled. All right. All right. All right. So now I'm discipling Jason here, but Darren's working it, and we got and Alan. They're my other guys over there. All right. See, now what's happened is this is called a disciple-making team. Now it started just with the 2 of us. But now as we're multiplying out, now we've actually got a couple of generations, right? We've at least got 3 generations of people that I've discipled, they're now discipling, they're now about to disciple somebody else. Now, in our church, we have 5 to 6 deep disciple-making generations in our church. Now, the thing is, that can happen at any size church. It doesn't matter if you've got 10 or if you've got 1,000, that you can create this team of disciple makers, all right? So these are the people who are going to help you. Just look at them. Don't they look good? These people are going to help you to make disciples and to lead the church forward. All right, give a hand to our disciple-making team. All right, thank you, guys. All right, so how do you do that? How do you Jesus started with the 12, and then that 12 moved to 72. And then that 72, we have 120 in the upper room, right? There were 500 there when Jesus was ascended. So there was obviously some 4 to 5 generations deep going on in the multiplication of Jesus' ministry. And that's what needs to happen in your ministry as well. So the first thing you do, you start discipling a person with a view that you want to build a team. So what are some things to do to build a team? I'm going to kind of skip through these things pretty quickly. Number 1 is identify your disciple makers. Once you're discipling people, you start with the faithful ones, then you keep an eye on the ones that are reproducing. You have some way of knowing who's multiplying and who's not, who's reproducing and who's not. At the beginning, when things are small, you can just write it down on a piece of paper, right? I know this guy and this guy. I think it was said of John Wesley that he would take copious notes of all the people that had been discipled and who was ready to disciple someone else. And he would go through his lists of people. He was very meticulous. So you need to think about, I need to build a team in my church. I need 4 or 5 or 6. What would happen if in your church you had 10 people that were living by the Holy Spirit, giving, serving, passionate in the Word, sharing their faith, don't you think that'd make a difference? Even just 5 people like that would make a huge difference. Well, that's your disciple-making team. So you identify, you start with a few trusted believers that you look and watch out for and keep up with these reproducers. You gather them together. You serve them dinner at your house. You meet them for breakfast. You talk about disciple-making. You cheer them on. You celebrate them. You answer their questions. You help them sort through their problems that they're having, right? And as you're doing that, you're developing this leadership team that is going to help you transition the church. The whole church is going to come from this leadership team, okay? Number 2, you clarify your mission. As you're building your team, you keep the mission of the church central, okay? Matthew 20:18, Jesus said, go make disciples of all nations. So you start talking about that this is the mission of our church. Maybe you need to go back to your mission statement and you start saying, okay, is it clear in our church's mission statement that we're about the Great Commission to make disciples? But you start clarifying your mission as a church. You know, churches can drift and they lose sight of why we're doing this in the first place. They think we just exist for ourselves when we don't. We're a people on mission. But these people, these leaders, this team that you have is going to help influence people to be more thoughtful about disciple making. Another thing you want to do is you want to cast a clear, compelling vision. Now, if you're dying to preach on disciple making, now's the time to do it. Because now you've got a team of people, right? They're proof that it works. And they're your helpers when others want to be discipled. And so now you start preaching about it. Now you start casting vision. Now you start talking about disciple making. And you know, Jesus was the master vision caster. He used so many different illustrations. Just like the fishing for men, right? He goes, you're here fishing. I want to teach you to fish for men. Your goals for your life are way too small. I've got a much bigger plan for your life. Jesus also said other things. For example, he said, look, lift up your eyes. The fields are ripe for harvest. That's a vision statement. Look at all the opportunity we have. Look at all these communities around us that need Christ. Look at all these people that need to hear the gospel, that we need to mobilize and make disciples to reach them. Or he said, I'm the vine and you're the branches. If anyone abides in me and I in him, he'll bear much fruit. Your life could be fruitful. You could have fruit, everlasting fruit for your life. Your life is not just ranching or farming or working or being an accountant. Your life is more than that. Your life needs to be fruitful, and I want to show you how to do that. See, you're starting to cast vision the way Jesus cast vision. Always raising their eyes from the mundane of what they know to what their life could be. What their life could be if they would simply invest their lives in others. So this is the time to cast vision. And as I said before, don't do that before you make disciples. Do it after you've made some disciples. After you got that team, then that team is ready to help you. Because when people hear a great vision cast, they're like, man, sign me up. Well, then I've got some people that are going to help me to disciple in my church, all right? Vision creates movement, creates motivation, it creates inspiration, and people are ready for it. So start preaching vision after you've made a team. Here's another one. Communicate a simple disciple-making pathway. You need to start talking about explore, connect, grow, and multiply. You need to start unveiling this idea that, hey, we're not just doing random things. We're actually trying to take you somewhere. I have a young couple in our church that joined, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. They came in our church. They joined the church. They were already believers. They quickly got into what we call a connect group, because this is in the connect phase. And they made great friends and were starting to grow. Then they got into a grow group, because this is a grow phase. That's what we call it. We're really simple around there. We try to keep it all the same. And in the grow group, they started being discipled. They both came to me in tears. And they said, we've never been a part of a church that seriously tried to help us grow spiritually. And we're blown away that this thing is dialed in to help us grow. Thank you. Thank you. She's about to go to Montreal for a church plant that we're doing up there. He's about to board the plane for Zambia in November to be a part of a church plant down there. I mean, they're already living on mission. It's because there was a pathway. They knew what was the next step. Listen, the people in your church need to know, what's my next step? What's my first step? What's my second step? What's my third step? And guess what? It's up to the leaders of the church to figure that out. And you don't have to just come up with it on your own. Jesus has actually given you a pathway right here. All right? And so now's the time you start to develop your spiritual growth pathway. What are your next steps? People move through this process by invitation and celebration. Invitation, celebration. In other words, you invite people to come to the next step, and then when they do it, you celebrate. Woo! Right? So when somebody comes to faith in Christ, we baptize them. In our church, I say, man, we raise the roof. Everybody cheers and shouts and whistles and that kind of thing. Because, I mean, if all of heaven's going to celebrate, all of heaven's celebrating, we should get in on some of that. So we celebrate that. But then when they get involved in a group, we cheer and celebrate when they get in a group. When they get discipled, we cheer and celebrate that and recognize that. When groups multiply, we cheer and celebrate that. When they go on mission, we cheer and celebrate that. See, people usually do what gets celebrated, right? And if they go, well, nobody's celebrating me. I'll say, well, you need to make a step. Make a step and we'll celebrate it, all right? But let's all go through this step together. So identifying this pathway and helping people move through that is the stuff of what disciple-making churches are made of. Identifying the steps and moving people through those steps. Place disciple makers in positions of leadership. That is a big one. All right? Is that the next one, Keith? Can you put that one up there? There you go. There you go. Help disciple makers move into positions of leadership. Let me tell you something. You need some of those guys that you saw me just disciple, my little discipleship team. You need to move them into deacons and leaders and Sunday school teachers and women's ministry leaders and people like that. Because then when you start to say, we're going to dial in our process, now we're going to craft this mission statement. Now we're going to start casting this vision. They're not going to be fighting you because they already know. They're on board with you. The leadership council in our church, almost every one of them has either been discipled by me directly or by someone who I discipled. So we don't have squabbles over whether we should be making disciples or not, or whether Explore, Connect, Grow, Multiply is the right thing, or we just don't argue about that kind of stuff. Because everybody knows it. In fact, if I were to try to change it, they go, whoa, 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 preacher. What are you doing? We're a disciple-making church here, right? They'd probably run me out on a rail if I tried to change it now, which is the way it ought to be, right? But the leaders have to be on board. And the way you get the leaders on board is you start by discipling a few, and then you gradually begin to move them into leadership so that now the leadership is on board with you. I talked to a friend of mine who was in Oklahoma, and he went to go pastor his childhood church that he grew up in as a kid. And he was so excited. 3 years later, he was quitting. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I got sideways with, some of the leadership, and I just, before it was a big old fight, I just decided to quit, to resign. I said, well, you were there how long? 3 years. I said, well, how many people did you disciple in that 3 years? Quiet. Well, I was busy. I had to do Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and hospital visitation and counseling. And I understand that. How many did you disciple? Nobody. So there was nobody there to support you, nobody there to champion your vision, nobody there to help you. No. This is a recipe for most churches and most pastors that go for a period of time and then, either get fired or quit or get discouraged or disillusioned. See, the answer to it is just the answer of getting your man, getting your one or two, investing in them, helping them do others, and then raising up those disciples to be in leadership, and then starting to cast a vision, cast the mission, laying out the pathway. And what does that look like in your church? I went to a gathering kind of like this in Alabama about a month ago. And when I got there, a couple of guys ran up to me and they said, "Hey, look at this." I said, "What is this?" And it was some logo kind of thing. And it says, "Explore, connect, grow, multiply." They said, "This is our pathway." I said, "Well, man, that sounds pretty biblical to me." He goes, "Man, it is." He said, "And we're getting all it dialed in, and man, we're moving our people through it, and we're making disciples." And they were so fired up. See, that's what leadership looks like. Leadership is not maintaining the status quo. That's not leading, that's just managing. Leading means I move you from point A to point B. Leadership means I'm moving you somewhere. We're going somewhere. And when you do that, when you start with a few, then you build a team, and then with that team, you start to talk about the vision, the mission. You begin to do all these things here that we're talking about, creating this pathway. Then all of a sudden, it can actually happen without you getting fired, which is a really nice thing, right? Amen for not getting fired. All right. And then the last thing is pray together as a team. You think about the ministry, the prayer ministry of Jesus, how Jesus prayed with his guys and how he retreated, prayed. I mean, we don't have time right now, but I could take you through all the different times that Jesus retreated to pray. Prayer was such an important part of his ministry. And so what we're going to do is, as you build this team, you need to be praying with them and praying for your church and praying for revival and awakening and praying for disciples to be made. These people will become very dear to your heart. Think about the Apostle Paul's ministry. Did he not do that? He had Timothy's and Titus's, and then he had Epaphras and all these kind of guys around him that were dear to his heart, that he had poured his life into, that were now leading the churches. Timothy ultimately becomes pastor of Ephesus. Why? Because he was a faithful man that Paul had trained, and now it was his turn to do it. See, you got to start with your team. Raise up your team, put them in leadership, and then begin to lead together the church to be what Jesus created it to be.